Hi, I'm Greg Tannenberger, Professional Development and External Relations Specialist for the Fowler College of Business. Some of you have worked with me before, but if you have not, I specialize in helping our students learn to network effectively in order to help them with their career goals. But in this workshop today, we're going to talk specifically about how you can use networking and reaching out to specific targeted contacts in order to enhance your research on projects such as consulting projects for real-world companies or for an MBA thesis report that you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump into our presentation today. So you might be part of our MBA consulting program. You could be doing independent work on from a different class or an internship. This seminar today is going to kind of focus on a skill set that you can use now in many different projects that you're on in the future and in your careers as well. So we're going to start with a case study. Let's say ABC Corp develops a proprietary EV battery, so that's electronic vehicle, and seeks a partnership with a large automobile manufacturer. They've hired your consulting firm to get a recommendation on the companies which they should approach, right? So you have reached or researched the market already and identified certain metrics by which to evaluate the potential partners. And according to your metrics, let's say General Motors is the highest rated potential partner that you have. So then the next question is, how do you validate a recommendation to partner with General Motors, right? So your secondary research gave you a lot of great information, but for instance, maybe General Motors just isn't interested in partnering. You'd hate to make a recommendation saying that the statistics show General Motors is the right company, and only for the company that you're advising to be stonewalled when they try to reach out to General Motors. So ideally, you would be talking to someone directly at General Motors in a position that could facilitate such a partnership, right? And so part of the project, that you'd be working on would be you finding out directly from that person. But how do you go about doing that? If you're not like myself, who is accustomed to finding contact information every single day for different partnership opportunities, then you might be lost at this stage of your project. But that's where this workshop is going to help give you a blueprint on how to go about making those contacts successfully and what to say to approach those contacts, what to say in those kind of conversations, right? So you're going to decide to reach out to an EV executive at General Motors. Who do you know at General Motors? My guess, if you're here at San Diego State University, far away from the corporate headquarters of General Motors, you probably don't know anybody at General Motors. So we're going to have to first figure out who it is that we should be contacting. LinkedIn is a wonderful resource for making connections, right? So many of you might already be on LinkedIn and use it as a professional networking social media platform. But what we're going to use it for these purposes is a database, a great resource of information about people who work at places like General Motors. So we would start out going to the LinkedIn homepage and typing in the search engine General Motors. And that would take us to General Motors homepage. And there's going to be a lot of wonderful information that you can find here about General Motors. For our purposes, we're interested in where this red circle is at on the screen, the 121,000 employees at General Motors who have LinkedIn pages. That's an incredible wealth of information about different employees, and it could be overwhelming at the same time. We certainly don't have time to go through 121,000 of those employees. But if you click on that number, you're going to get a list, and it's going to have several different pages of employees. Usually they're listed by their connection level to you. So if you're directly connected with them already on LinkedIn, they'll appear first. If somebody you know is connected with them, they will appear second. So what we want to do is when this list comes up is use their filters to specifically target an individual that could be helpful for the case study scenario that we had laid out for this presentation. So we want to go up to the All Filters button and click on that, and it's going to bring down a side menu. And what we'll do is we'll scroll all the way down to the title, and we're going to type in VP EV, right? So pretty simple. We're looking for someone at a really high level at General Motors who is working with electronic vehicles. So after we hit the show results on the right-hand side, the list is going to be modified. And from that 121,000 employees that we previously saw, it narrows it all the way down to 4, right? So that's really effective. Just putting in 4 letters into the filter, we have found, the perfect group of people that we may want to approach. Now, there are several other filters that can be very helpful, some of which we will talk about a little later in this presentation. But going to the title is one of the ones that I like to start out with because it yields these kind of results, right? So let's say you go through the 4 different profiles here, and you've identified Travis Hester and Brian Sweeney as the 2 best fits for your project, two different of the people at General Motors that you think you may want to approach to gain more information to validate your recommendation for General Motors, right? So here we're looking at Brian Sweeney's page. We see certain things on his page that lets you believe that he could be somebody who would work for your project, such as emerging technology in his about section and cross-brand vehicle strategies. So those 2 things, well, cross-brand vehicle strategies for Travis. So I got both their profiles opened here. So those things jump out at us as, these 2 people might be a great fit for a project. So I encourage you when you're doing your research projects to keep track of these contacts as you're going through. I like to just open up a simple Excel spreadsheet page. Let's say General Motors is one of your companies, but you might have 5 to 10 different companies that you're going to be reaching out to. So you'll have a company column. You put the company down, the name of the contact, the title, so you understand why you're reaching out to them. And then you're going to put their contact information on the right-hand side. Now, we could use LinkedIn itself as a means to contact both Travis and Brian. We could send them a LinkedIn request and add a note on that LinkedIn request, telling them exactly what it is that we want to do with them. But the problem is Travis or Brian could accept that connection request without ever seeing the note. And we find that, or statistically speaking, even, people on average check their LinkedIn about once a month, right? That's not good for your project, especially if your project is going to only be a 3-month-long project, right? Now, for me, someone like me who works in external relations and using LinkedIn as a tool, I'm checking it every single day. But even I don't use LinkedIn as a primary communication source. So even someone who might be a high-level user of LinkedIn may not be apt to communicate with you on that channel. So what I'm going to recommend is that LinkedIn, for the communication part of the strategy, be a last resort. If you got no other way to send a communication to Travis and Brian, you can use LinkedIn to do that. What I am recommending is to reach out to Brian and Travis by a medium that they use every single day, multiple times a day at their workplace, right? And you want to talk to them about a professional concept and partnering for your project that you want to make a recommendation for. So it's only appropriate that you reach out to them using their professional email. So I want to introduce you here to hunter.io. Hunter.io is a web tool that was introduced to me by product marketing managers at LinkedIn, who also admit that LinkedIn, for communication purposes, isn't the most effective way to connect with different professionals for these types of purposes. So Hunter.io, not hunter.com. So just make sure that you get that domain right. And there's multiple tools on Hunter.io that we can use, but we're going to start with a domain search, right? And you may not necessarily know the domain of your company, so you could start by just typing in General Motors. But if you already know the domain, you type in gm.com, for instance, and you'll see pop up a selection of different companies that might fit your description. So if you typed in General Motors, you might have the actual General Motors that you want, but you might also have a few other companies that use similar names around the world. Typing in gm.com, you get the result of General Motors because that is the precise domain. So what's going to see here on the right-hand side is 1,655 results. And what Hunter.io is doing on the domain search is looking for that email domain and seeing how many email addresses it can find in order to make a recommendation for you on an email format. And that's the great thing about the emails is even without a tool like Hunter.io, you could probably guess, once you know the domain of a company, what the potential top 2 or 3 email formats are going to be, and if not within that, the top 8 or so. But Hunter.io saves you some time, and it's going to do some searches for you and help you to make a more educated guess. So after you click on General Motors, it's going to give you a pattern that will show up, and it says the most common pattern is first name dot last name at gm.com. And then it's going to show you an example, several examples on the left-hand side of emails that it found that fit that format or might not fit that format, but the ones that it decided in order to give you the recommendation on the most common format. So, for instance, we are seeing Craig Buchholz at gm.com, so Craig.Buchholz. And so if we were to use the same formats for the 2 contacts that we wanted to reach out to at General Motors, there would probably be a pretty high likeliness that your email is actually going to reach those leaders at General Motors. Now, is it 100%? No, there are some reasons why somebody's email might not follow the email format of a company. So even though we were able to figure out the email format, they may be separate, from that general rule. Some of those reasons might include common names, right? So if there were more than one person named Mike Smith at a company, then somebody's going to have a different email format. More common when it's not first name dot last name, but first initial last name, which, by the way, when you look at this most common pattern, if it's an initial, it'll just have the first letter rather than spelling out first and spelling out last. So it would say F and then no period. It would say F last at gm.com if the format were first initial last name at gm.com. So you could have 2 people with the same last name, like my name, Tonneberger, but I could be Greg and there could be a Georgina. We would otherwise have the same name, so someone's going to have something different. So there are other reasons as well, but those are just a few examples on why that may not work, but with a pretty high likeliness that it's going to reach it. But there is another tool at hunter.com that we can use if we want to have even more confidence. It's called the email verifier. So after we got the format, we click on the email verifier. And let's take Travis Hester as the person at GM that we want to reach out to. So we use the format, first name dot last name at gm.com. We put his name in there, travis.hester at gm.com, and we tell it to verify. And in this case, Hunter.io was able to actually verify that Travis email is correct. So that's where you get this little green shield with the check mark and it says valid. you can be probably 99% confident now that your email is going to reach them. What are some reasons why it still wouldn't reach them? Generally speaking, it has validated it, so we know it's a good email address. But something could be blocking you from the GM side, right? So it's always possible that you can't get through even after knowing what Travis's email address is. But now we know that this is Travis's email address, and we would add it to our page, and we'd move on to the next professional to try to validate their website or find their web email address, and then we'll just keep doing that. Go through all of the different professionals that you want until we got the contact information and are ready to reach out to them. So on this verifier, it doesn't work for every single company. Some companies have formatted their mailboxes so it can't be verified. So basically, if you were to send the actual email that is true, and you also sent one that is complete gibberish, sent them at the same time, basically the exact same thing is going to happen once it lands at that company. So if that's the case, this verifying tool is going to tell you that it's unable to verify, and instead of green, it's going to give you like an orangish yellow color, and say that it's an accept all format. So accept all is that key language for the format that is unable to verify. In that situation, it's still going to tell you how confident the algorithm of Hunter.io is in your format, saying, yes, we still might be 70% confident that you've got the right email address because it matches the format that we believe to be true for GM. Now, if it's invalid, so you got the wrong email address and it's able to verify that, instead of valid here, it'd have a red shield with an X in it, and it would say invalid. The great thing about an invalid website is you know that it can verify now, so you know that it can tell you accurately if it's true or not, and you know that one is out, right? So you can start guessing some of the other formats. Now you might see a different format in the list that was provided to you under the domain search, and you could try one of those other formats that you saw there and observed there. Or you could just try some different common email addresses. Like, so we already mentioned first initial last name, right? So if Travis Hester was invalid, I would try thester@gm.com and give that a try. And so there's about 8 different versions of emails that most companies use. There are some companies that might work on this validator, but they don't actually have a format. One company that matches that model is Google. So Google employees can use any email format that they would like, as long as it's professional. So it's not something that would reflect badly on the company. One thing that I do when I'm trying to find somebody at Google is I go back and look at where they worked before they worked at Google. Because a lot of times the easiest thing for them to do is, if I was G. Tonneberger at sdsu.edu and then I got a job at Google, I might choose G. Tonneberger at google.com, right? Because that is going to be easiest for my contacts to transition and figure out my email over at Google. So very common for employees that had worked somewhere else to just basically import over their previous format. There's also companies like Microsoft that have more than one email format, and it really depends on the department that they're working in. So if I'm in engineering, I might have first name dot last name at Microsoft.com, but if I'm in marketing, I might have first initial last name at Microsoft.com. And so you kind of also have to know the area that person is working in. So a few companies make the verification and even the format a little bit harder. But for the most part, this method is pretty effective at helping you find great email addresses. So here's an example of the invalid email address. So if I put Brian Sweeney in, we find that he is actually somebody whose email address doesn't fit the GEM standard on email addresses. And then an accept all, I changed Travis Hester to Disney rather than to GM. And it shows you what an accept all looks like. And you see down here the 70% score that is still confident based off of the format that you use, that would be a good email address. So what we've been able to do is find an email address for Travis Hester. Oops, I put it in the wrong position here. That should be at the top one. But we were unable to find one for Brian Sweeney. So there are some other methods that we can do to try to figure out Brian Sweeney, including a search of potential email addresses on Google. What I would try to do, since we were able to validate Travis Hester, is just try a few different versions on the hunter.io. It's like, well, let's try B Sweeney. Let's try Brian _ Sweeney rather than period. Let's try Brian Sweeney together. Let's try reversing them, Sweeney.Brian. So trying a few different formats there first. If it was an accept all, I'd probably go straight to a web browser like Google. But if you're going to use a web browser to try to look, what you want to do is put quotation marks around the email address. So for instance, if we're using travis.hester@gm.com, the algorithm at Google is going to read that period, the ampersand, and the second period, all as spaces. And then it's not going to prioritize an order. So it's just going to look for Travis's, Hester's, GM's, and comms. And it may only find 3 of them. It may only find 2 of them. And it's going to bring you back thousands of results that you don't have to look through. But when you put quotation marks around travis.hester@gm.com, it has to be in that order, and it has to be all 4, which then is probably likely going to tell you yes or no that email does exist on the website. So now we figured out an email. So we're going to use Travis' contact information. We want to reach out to Travis going forward. So we know how to write him, but we don't necessarily know what to say. My recommendation, and this has been very effective, not only in my communications, but in how I teach other students and their success in reaching out to people, is you want to keep very short communication. The #1 reason why someone like Travis Hester may not respond to you after you reach out to them is that Travis is going to be very busy. So time is basically going to be your #1 challenge when reaching out to professionals. I've talked to many different professionals around San Diego and beyond, and I almost always ask them about their feelings about students reaching out to them for projects or for careers. And probably 99% have told me that they're absolutely open to students reaching out to them. I've only had 1 or 2 ever that I can think of that have told me, no, I'm not really comfortable with that. And generally, they tend to be very introverted people who just, they don't want to be contacted. And that's okay. You know, if you reach out to somebody and they don't want to talk to you, generally, they're just going to ignore you and you move on to somebody who is willing to contact you, right? But even somebody that's willing to contact you may not reply to you if they don't have time to even read your message. And that's a mistake that a lot of people make. They want to tell them their entire story. So you might outline your entire project or tell them about your history, you know, where you've gone, what you're doing. And that would be a big mistake. So keep your emails very short. And you just really need 3 things in there. Who are you? But in an extremely concise way. Why are you writing? And what do you want? If you have those 3 things in there, there's a strong likeliness that your email is going to be read. And that's really the #1 goal, right? Even in marketing, your first goal is to get your message to the customer, right? You know, so the customer has to, your message has to make an impression. You want to make an impression on the person that is reading this. Right? So if you do this correctly, have a short email, you cover these 3 things, you're probably going to be able to make an impression on that person. So here's an example. Greetings, Travis. My name is Abby Aztec, and I am an MBA student at San Diego State University. I am currently engaged in a research capstone project related to the EV market. Do you have some time for a quick interview about EV market insights and your role at General Motors? Kind regards, Abby, right? So this, in my opinion, would be a very effective way to reach out to Travis, and would likely, if he has time to meet with you, would likely yield a strong response. Now, let's break it down. So the first thing I said that you need to have is who you are. So who this person is, she's Abby Yaztek. She is an MBA student at San Diego State University. Now, this is really brief and really simple, right? And many of you are already well established in your careers. You could be working at great places like Qualcomm. Notice though, I kept it to San Diego State University. And there's nothing wrong with you mentioning that you are senior manager of supply chain at Qualcomm. That might be great information to have, but it's also not needed. You know, telling them that you're an MBA student at San Diego State University is enough, because it kind of already gives them the concept of why you might be reaching out to them in the first place. And students are very non-threatening to the person reading it on the other side. You know, they don't feel like they're fishing. They don't feel like you're doing competitive market work on them. You're a student, and they generally have a disposition of wanting to help out students, right? So second thing, I'm currently engaged in a research capstone project related to the EV market. That is why you're reaching out to them, right? So that covers your why. You notice that I didn't go into more specifics. I told them that it's related to the EV market, but I didn't outline the entire project for them, or even exactly why and what kind of questions that I want to ask them. That can all come in follow-ups. You know, if they want to know the types of questions you want to ask before they agree to meet with you, that's fine, but you've already got them on the hook once they reply. And this should be enough information for you to get the reply. Again, if the person on the other end has even time to reply, you know, they might be busy. Your email could get buried pretty easily during the day. So understand that, you know, this method isn't going to be 100% effective, but it's going to be highly effective, more highly effective than, again, a long email that has too much information in it. So the third part of this is, do you have some time for a quick interview about EV market insights and your role at General Motors? That's the what do you want part. I want a quick interview with you, right? So you get straight to the point here. Now, I suggest saying quick interview, and sometimes you can even give numbers, right? You have time for a 10 to 15 minute interview, right? You may want to interview them for 30 minutes or even an hour. But once you ask for an hour, you're fighting that time issue, right? Like, when do I have an hour to put aside? But if you tell them it is a quick interview, subconsciously it's already working on them, you know, and if you give them a time frame like 10 to 15 minute interview, it makes it far more likely that they're going to be able to make that time, right? I could be wrapping up at the end of the day, it's 5 o'clock, and I say, well, I could jump on this interview right at 5 o'clock. And get it done and help out that student, and I'll be out the door by 5:15, right? So it's not an incredible burden on me, you know, so making the small ask may make it go well. Now, even though I agree to the 15-minute interview, that interview could go so well that we chat well beyond even the interview questions that you designed, and you gain additional insights to what you were even planning. That's all possible, and that would all be ideal. But you got to get the interview first. And so you want to give them this concept that we aren't going to take a lot of your time. So that's the email. Now I might reach back out to you. I'm Travis, and I say, great. You know, I'm free at 5 o'clock Monday through Friday. Send me a invite for a Zoom invitation, and I will accept it, right? You know, so now you're going to set that up, you send it out to me, but you're not really sure what kind of things you might want to say with someone like Travis. And by the way, for the purpose of interviewing them, Zoom is very effective. But if you're looking to establish greater, longer term relationships with any of the people that you're reaching out to, and they are local, so you have the ability to meet with them in person. I do highly recommend in-person meetings. It does create deeper, more long-lasting relationships that will yield a greater advocacy, for you. So that person that you're connected with is more likely to do things for you now and in the future, if you're establishing that in-person relationship versus the virtual. But Travis, he's up north in Detroit, and we're here in San Diego. We're going to do this virtually. But what kind of questions do we want to be asking Travis? Now, a lot of that is really going to depend on the design of your research project and what specific things you're getting at. But I do want to introduce you to a handful of things that you can ask. Tell me about your experience in the EV industry, right? So why is that an important one, even if that's not important to the recommendation that you're making? Because the person that you're making the recommendation to is not going to necessarily be impressed with Travis just because he's working at General Motors. So by learning a little bit about Travis's experience, and then using what you learned about it, maybe it's in an appendix on your final report, or on supporting information slides, in your presentations, you can be prepared to talk about Travis's area of expertise, and that's going to help validate his authority and why it was important that you talk to Travis and why they might want to talk to Travis. So it lends great credibility by finding out the information about his experience. Then you might want to ask about trends in the EV market, so that can help shape your future recommendations. What challenges are they currently facing? So what are the pitfalls? What are the things to watch out to? And then specifically for the project that we did the case study for, if there was a proprietary battery that could outperform your current battery, would you be interested in connecting with the manufacturer, right? So you're kind of pre-establishing that partnership before even recommending them. And that's where you might find out from Travis, like GM only partners with XYZ, like you have to meet this criteria, right? And then you can take that criteria back, to the company that you're doing the research for. Or if he said, what, GM just doesn't partner with outside manufacturing, we do everything in-house, you can also take that to heart and say, well, we're not going to recommend GM then if it's going to be such a high barrier of entry to try to establish a partnership, because then you're going to have to overcome this policy of them only working in-house. You might also say, are there any other industry leaders that you would recommend that I speak to about this project, right? Now, I didn't say at GM. Now, you might want to talk to other people at GM, and Travis can certainly open the door to that, right? Travis, even though you couldn't find an email for Brian Sweeney, Travis could open the door to contact Brian Sweeney, and then you have another conversation with someone like Brian. He could introduce you to people that you didn't even think about, right? That are working at GM. But we don't limit it to GM because Travis may also know a lot of other people, so GM could already be working with third parties, or Travis, being in the industry, could have a lot of friends that aren't at GM that are working in the industry that he may also recommend to you. So I like more open-ended questions that don't necessarily limit the companies unless that's specific to your project. Like if your project was just limited to what GM is doing, then you would specifically ask, okay, do you know anybody else at GM? But otherwise, leave it open and allow someone like Travis, after you successfully connect to him, to potentially connect you with other people who could be helpful at advancing your project. So that is, in a nutshell, how you would go about reaching out to contacts and setting up those interviews, or even just getting the information for you to send a survey to, or setting up, certain types of panel discussions, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, but you need to reach out to people that you don't already know. This is a pretty effective method of establishing those communications. But this is just a start. It takes time to perfect this type of outreach. If you got any questions, and if you would like to kind of go more in depth on any part of this, if you'd like a live demonstration of it, I can be available to help you out with any of those things. I'm located in Lambden Hall 336, or you can reach out to me at my email address, gtanaberger@sdsu.edu. I wish you a lot of luck on your projects or thesis. And I look forward to working with you all on your career searches as well, or your career journeys. Even if you're already happy, with the company that you're working at, I can talk to you about advancement within those companies. So I highly encourage each of you to reach out to me at some point during your time here at SDSU to talk about that career journey. Take care.